morning. That's a pleasure to be here. I and my colleague Laura that are here probably look a lot more relaxed since you've last seen us, now that the standards are done. So I'm going to just tell you about what's next for us. For those of you that are not familiar with GHG Protocol, our mission is to develop internationally accepted greenhouse gas and reporting standards and then make sure that they're widely adopted, with the ultimate goal of achieving a low emissions economy. So now that our new standards are done, our goal moving forward is to make sure they're widely adopted and then ultimately drive reductions. GHG Protocol is a collaboration of WRI and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development that started about 12 years ago with the development of our corporate standard. And that has now become the most widely used approach to measure corporate greenhouse gas emissions. One of our main strategies for getting that standard widely adopted was working closely with programs around the world to use this standard as the foundation for their programs. And you can see here just a few of the programs that have already adopted the corporate standard. Now dozens of programs around the world use it. And now with the launch of our new standards, we now have that as a key part of our strategy as well. And we already have two major initiatives that have adopted our new standards. So the Sustainability Consortium announced earlier this year that they've adopted our product standard. And then also the Consumer Goods Forum over the last year has endorsed both the Scope 3 and the product standard for use by their members. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Carbon Disclosure Project that regularly surveys companies, and they use the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as the framework for reporting greenhouse gas emissions in their survey. And in 2010 survey, over 85% of their respondents said they were using GHG Protocol or reporting through a program that's based on GHG Protocol. So now I'll tell you a little bit about the new standards and more about what we're going to be doing moving forward. And I'll start with a 3-minute video that hopefully you haven't seen yet. That's a simplified explanation through animation of our standards, and hopefully it's also entertaining as well. I'm going to cross my fingers that it works. Where's the sound?
Just before. Let's go back.
You can see it.
This is a business, and these are greenhouse gases. Together, they have an amazing story to tell about profit, efficiency, resilience, and the climate. Like all businesses, this one wants to grow and be successful. It knows that being a successful business is about more than just selling products. That today's businesses track the health and profitability of their organization using a whole range of vital social and environmental indicators, and that greenhouse gases are one of the most revealing of all. Take carbon, for example. Managing carbon is a key ingredient to a successful business, and not just because it's good for the environment, it's also a way to save money, cut risks, and create exciting new business opportunities. That's why the World Resources Institute and World Business Council for Sustainable Development created the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. We work with businesses to develop standards and tools that help companies measure, manage, report, and reduce their carbon emissions. Over the last decade, we've helped thousands of businesses account for the greenhouse gases impact of their own operations and be more profitable as a result. It's made a big difference, but there's more to do. You see, every organisation has an impact that goes far beyond its factory gates or office reception. Take a company that makes cars, for example. Its impacts reach right back to sourcing steel and aluminium, through manufacturing the cars, delivering them to showrooms, driving them, and even recycling them at the end of their lives. Everything the car company does, from buying, producing and selling its products, is called the value chain. With our new corporate value chain standard, companies can now see the full impact of their activities and figure out where they can make the biggest difference. For the car company, it comes down to answering questions like, what materials should we use? And how can we improve fuel efficiency? So now it can make informed decisions about how best to save money, design products and cut risks in their business. But understanding the impacts in the life cycles of individual products gives businesses even more focus. Imagine the car company makes an SUV and also an electric car. Our product standard allows the company to work out how their impacts differ and how best to reduce emissions across the life cycle of each car, which means they can focus efforts on things like making the SUV more fuel efficient or working out the cleanest way to build and dispose of the battery for the electric car. Working together, our new standards give every business the ability to make decisions that increase competitive advantage, drive efficiency and innovation, and cut risks. If we apply them to thousands of businesses and millions of products all over the world, the positive impact on business and on the climate will be enormous. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the foundation for sustainable climate strategies.
If anyone's interested in sharing the video with anyone, it's available to download on our website. So just to tell you a little bit about our two standards. The corporate value chain standard is a supplement to the corporate greenhouse gas standard, and the product life cycle standard also complements the Scope 3 standard in that they both take a life cycle approach to greenhouse gas emissions. The corporate value chain standard looks at the life cycle impacts of a business at the corporate level. So it looks at all the products, the impacts of all the products a company buys and sells. And while the product life cycle standard focuses in just at the impacts of a single product. And this is just a diagram that you'll see in the standard on the Scope 3 standard that explains how the Scope 3 emissions fit in with corporate emissions. So for the reporting company, the blue arrow in the middle is the company's Scope 1 emissions, or their direct emissions from their operations, and Scope 2 is from the electricity that they purchase, and then the two purple arrows are all their Scope 3 emissions. And we've divided Scope 3 emissions into 15 categories. So as I said, all the upstream emissions generally represent what a company purchases, and the downstream emissions generally represents goods and services a company sells. And the product life cycle standard focuses in on the life cycle impacts of an individual product from cradle to grave. The standard also accommodates cradle to gate assessments as well. It's based off the ISO 1444 standard, and it's also been informed by PAS 2050. It's consistent with ISO standard for a single impact LCA, and is generally consistent with the revised version of PAS 2050. The standard, like ISO, provides a lot of requirements on how to account for greenhouse gas emissions. We go into a lot more detail about how to report a product inventory, and we provide a lot of detailed guidance. Based on input we got from stakeholders, they wanted additional specificity around a lot of technical issues where we've provided requirements or guidance on topics like recycling, land use change, system boundaries. This is just an overview of the steps that we recommend a company use to complete a Scope 3 or a product inventory. We have more detailed steps laid out in each of the standards. With some of the first step is to define your business goal and then review the accounting principles that we have. And we find this to be a really critical step that will drive all the decisions you have to make throughout the standards. So where we provide flexibility and you need to make a decision, it's important to always go back to what's the purpose of the inventory for your business, and how do you want to make decisions between trade-offs on the accounting principles based on those business goals. And then for both standards, you would, for the Scope 3 standard, you would next map a value chain. For the product standard, you would then develop a process map, and then you would collect and assess data based off 5 data quality criteria we use, and then perform allocation if needed, calculate results. In the Scope 3 standard, assurance is optional. For the first time in a greenhouse gas protocol standard and the product standard, we require assurance. It can be self-assurance or third-party assurance. Critical review, because that's already a standard practice for LCA, is also acceptable. And then our standards have a lot of focus on reporting emissions, and we require a very transparent inventory report to be in conformance with the standard. And that's based on experience that companies that report their emissions are much more likely to then manage them and reduce their emissions to respond to stakeholders. And then we also provide guidance and requirements around how to create a base inventory and set reduction targets and track your performance over time. Now that our standard development process is complete, this is just a summary of what we did. We had about 2,300 participants that were involved in some part of the process. One of the key elements of our process was the road testing of the standards with 60 companies. And they gave us very detailed feedback on the first draft of the standard, which were then integrated into the next draft. We have a truly global process with 55 countries, representation from 55 countries. And we've gotten in-person feedback through technical working group meetings, stakeholder steering committee meetings that we had every 6 months, and stakeholder workshops we had around the world on the drafts. So together, combined, we had 12 events, and the whole process took 3 years. So we kind of pulled out of the standard some tips that we think will be useful for businesses as they start to implement the standards, especially for companies that find them a little daunting. Especially for companies doing a Scope 3 inventory, I think they find all the categories a little overwhelming. So we're trying to find ways to explain it in a way that's practical so that they see that it really is a feasible task. So some of these tips are just never lose sight of your business objectives, that you should always be referring back to them as you're doing the inventory, because they will really drive the decisions you make. So for example, a company that just wants to get an understanding of what their Scope 3 impacts are and where to focus their efforts, they could just collect secondary data and not even worry about collecting data from suppliers to make the kind of business decisions that they would need to. And then we also just recommend an incremental approach. Again, for like the Scope 3 standard, we have 15 categories, so maybe a company can't tackle all 15 in the first year, but they might want to tackle 3 or 4 where they think their hotspots are and work towards having a full Scope 3 inventory over time. And then just to keep in mind that perfect data isn't really necessary to meet many business goals, and so perfect could be the enemy of the good in this case for sure. And then once you get a complete inventory, over time we assume that you'll then focus where your hotspots are on improving those areas for getting better data quality. And then we also give guidance in an appendix in both the standards on a data management plan. And we find that this is a really worthwhile effort. And so while it didn't end up being a requirement in the standards, we really recommend that all companies complete it. It basically is a way to institutionalize internally your process for completing an inventory so that it can always be recreated over time. So it would document who's the staff, what's their contact information that completed the inventory, what data sources did you use, who'd you collect the data from, and what QA, quality control, and quality assurance procedures did you use to check the quality of and accuracy of the data? And then this is also, if you're going to seek assurance, most of this information that's here in the data management plan would be what assurance provider is going to ask you for, so it's a great assurance readiness tool. So just going to provide a few quick case studies that we've collected from road testers of the standard. Some of these are in the standards themselves. Kraft is one of the Scope 3 road testers. Their business objective was to complete a Scope 3 inventory just to use it for some strategic decision-making purposes on how to reduce their emissions. And what they found is that they really didn't need to collect supplier data. They could use all industry average life cycle data for their purposes. And they were surprised to find that 90% of their emissions were from Scope 3. And the majority of those emissions, I think 70%, came from raw materials that they purchased. So based on that, they're going to work to improve the quality of data for those upstream emissions. But they're also now found a few projects they're going to focus on investing in. So they're working with some of their cocoa producers in Ghana to increase crop yields while minimizing the use of carbon-intensive fertilizer. And in a New York Times article they got interviewed for recently around the launch of our standards, Dan Pettit was quoted as saying, "Think of carbon as waste. Somewhere there is inefficiency." Now I'm going to just talk about Swire Beverages, which was a product standard road tester. They're a China-based bottler for Coca-Cola. And they performed life cycle studies for 9 products as part of their road testing. And they learned that packaging and refrigeration by retailers were the biggest contributors to emissions, which was also a big surprise to them. And as a result, they've already installed some energy-efficient refrigeration equipment and rolled out some new packaging design for a bottled water product that they're already, estimating that they will receive significant greenhouse gas reductions and assuming cost savings as well. So moving forward, as you can see from all our the standards you probably picked up in the back of the room that are available, as well as these USB ports on those little round USB ports. We've gone through a big new rebranding exercise, and this is just a sample of some of our materials and how we've been rebranding. And you can see in the middle there with the logo with the black background, that's a new mark that we're going to be using. Built on GHG Protocol. And our intention is to start using it for programs that want to say that the foundation of their program is built on one of our standards. So this could be for a greenhouse gas accounting reporting program, for a target setting and reduction program, or for a product labeling program. It wouldn't be used as a label, it wouldn't be on a product, it would just so the program could use it. We're still in the process of figuring out how we would review a program to determine whether they can use the mark or not, but we think it will provide credibility to programs that choose to use it, and it also create a lot of efficiency for programs because they won't need to design their own accounting methodology. They can use our standard. It would also give a lot of comfort to companies that operate globally, but they want to participate in programs in different countries, that they'll know that they can just use the same accounting methodology for all these different programs because they're all based on GHG Protocol. And then just to end with, I'll just tell you a little bit about some other activities we have going on. Yesterday we had our first workshop with program operators that might be interested in using the product standard to have just a peer exchange opportunity, look at what challenges they have around designing and implementing their program, and then getting some input about how GHG Protocol could support them. So one area moving forward will be working with greenhouse gas programs that may be interested in using the Scope 3 or product standard. We're also going to be working with key sectors on sector guidance and product rules. We launched earlier this year our first sector initiative with the ICT sector. They're developing sector guidance based on the product standard, and that should be finalized. So it should be out for public comments in around January, and hopefully finalized by around March or April. And then we also have a large effort on training. So you heard we're having our first training workshop on Friday that hopefully many of you are coming to. There's space for a few additional people in each of them if anyone's interested in staying for that. And then we'll be launching training all around the world. So we'll be having training workshops in China, India, Japan, in the US, and other places in Europe over the next year or two. We also launched a number of new tools on our website that you may have seen that reduce barriers to implementation of the standards. So one useful tool you might want to know about is that we have now a list of secondary data sources that you could use to calculate a Scope 3 or a product inventory, and we provide some descriptive information about each of these data sources to help you make a decision about which one may be appropriate for your inventory. And we have a number of other tools up there, one on quantitatively calculating uncertainty, and some guidance on uncertainty assessment. And then we'll be developing new tools as we move forward. And then finally, we are now thinking, now that these standards are done, we're now thinking about what standards are next on our plate. And we've just launched an initiative to develop a policy accounting standard that will be, that's not as applicable to businesses, it's more for governments to help them assess the successes of driving greenhouse gas reductions through various types of policies. And then we're also launching a city accounting standard, which is also appropriate for any kind of geopolitical boundary, not just cities. And just wanted to say thank you from the whole Greenhouse Gas Protocol team that worked on the new standards.